let's probably make a start if that's all right. So my name is, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rogers Govender, and I am the Dean of Manchester, and that means I'm based here at the cathedral in the city centre, and I'm very clearly through my uniform, I'm an ordained priest in the Church of England, and we work very hard with several partners, including colleagues like Kirith, to engage with the wider community. So thank you, Kirith, for inviting me to share in this session this afternoon, focusing very much on issues of men's health. That's primarily our subject this afternoon, speaking about men's health. Any issue that you may want to raise regarding men's health, it may be your partner, it may be yourself, it may be a friend or a colleague, or issues that have been troubling you. We're aware that during lockdown, sleep is a major problem for many of us, men and women. I know that I've been struggling with sleep for quite some time now. Believe it or not, I was awake at 3 a.m. this morning, and I wasn't able to go back to sleep for about an hour and a half. So needless to say, I eventually got up rather late than I normally do. Fortunately, my appointments this morning were slightly later, so I managed to get away with broken sleep at night than last night. But whatever the issues are, we're all adults. We want to agree a level of confidentiality. So don't, ground rules. Don't speak about somebody's kind of issue to somebody else without their permission, and certainly don't mention people by name. If you have to share with your partner or somebody else things that we've discussed, respect one another's confidences, and let's see how we can best help each other, support one another, and make a difference in terms of our health. So really, that's the broad idea. I wonder if I could ask Richard perhaps to introduce himself to us. Richard, thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm called Richard. I'm retired, a social worker, childcare social worker for 40 years. I've now retired. I'm a father, married, father of 2 grown-up children. One's a doctor, one's a midwife. Regarding cancer, I've had mental health problems myself, but regarding cancer, touch wood, I've steered free. I've had a near miss, but and I just think from my perspective, just to finish off, men's health, it's about time we started speaking about men's health. 40 years of social work has taught me that men are the worst, their own worst enemies when it comes to health. So I'm really pleased to be here today.
Brilliant, Richard. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Paul Mattis to introduce himself to us.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paul Mattis. I wear 2 hats in my working life. One, I'm doing some work for Cancer 5 UK, who supports people from the BME, Black, African and Caribbean communities in terms of who experience cancer and their carers also. And I also lead on the work of an organisation called Greater Manchester Eczema and Skin Support. We support people with inflammatory skin conditions such as eczema and psoriasis. With regards to health, I've been involved in men's health throughout my working career, basically, whether that be around the drug and gang culture, whether that be around sexual health, aspects of mental health. So happy to be here just to share some of my experiences around those areas of health.
Thanks, Paul. Brian, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Oh, if I must. I'm married. I've been married for 50 years. I have 2 children, 3 grandchildren. I did retire about 5 years ago, but came out of retirement this year. I'm I suppose a cancer survivor. I had cancer surgery in March of this year. So that's my excuse me, that's sort of my experience, and I think that's enough from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you very much indeed. So we've got one or two, three of our colleagues at least with us who have had experiences and certainly worked in the field of men's health and health in general. An opportunity to give them a chance to, at some point, to answer questions, make comments, and of course, it's a free for all in a way. I'm not going to kind of give you an organized program in that sense. It's an open question. What are the issues that we as men are struggling with at the moment? Feel free, anybody, just to kick off. Whilst you're thinking about that, I'll just say a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, back in Africa that I've been connecting with during COVID, just sent me a message this morning to say that the lymphoma cancer has spread to my bones and blood. Somebody's been receiving treatment, and somebody she's been a friend for many, many years. I've been praying for her, and she sent that news this morning that the lymphoma has spread. So it's beginning to look a little bit trickier for her now. And she's only about 56, so relatively young, with a son, a disabled son. So we know that cancer is very much around. There's no let up whatsoever.
Right.
Who would like to kick us off with issues that you're aware of that need sort of raising, need discussion and reflection on?
If I just start and just say, from a social work perspective, it's been obvious that men have been their own worst enemies for many, many, many years. And we have to have a look at where does this come from? And this comes basically from the socialization of when they are youngsters. I remember as a youngster being brought up with big boys don't cry. Yeah, big boys don't cry. You just get on with it. If I made a comment about how I was feeling mental health, well, mental health was for softies. You didn't talk about mental health. So again, you just got on with it. And again, I come from a generation where, my father, Second World War, my grandfather, First World War, you just got on with it. And that was the way that you were brought up. You were brought up not to worry about health. And if it was going to happen, it was going to happen. And we only have to look now at men's mental health, not just cancer, but men's mental health. And look at the statistics that it is the biggest killer in men under the age of 35. And that is frightening. And it's why can't men cope with the stresses and strains? They might be able to cope, but are they up there being allowed to cope? And to me, that is a major, major issue. Yeah. How does it affect men? Well, we tend to ignore things and think it'll go away. But cancer doesn't go away. Once it's got its hooks in you, it progresses. And I don't wish to monopolise this, but I had a scare. I had a bowel cancer kit. I had it for 3 months. Did I look at it? No, I ignored it and put it away. Eventually go and see the doctor on another issue and casually mention the problem I was having. And he went absolute bananas. Get to see a consultant, and then colonoscopy. And it was, panic. Do I really want this? The easy option was to do nothing. But don't do it. Do something. Doing nothing with cancer is not an option. It will not go away. So I feel passionate about this and passionate about speaking to men and say, don't be so daft. It doesn't hurt. Yeah, it's okay not to be okay. And many men find that difficult to handle.
Anybody else find that a problem?
I think
about big boys don't cry and men don't cry.
I don't know whether it's okay if I jump in. It's about I don't know. It's about this thing about not making a fuss and then moving away. And if I come at it from a slightly different perspective, I'm a testicular cancer survivor. 5 years clear now, thankfully, and everything's okay. My son had Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was 20. And in both our instances, we went to the GP. And we, my son knew there was something wrong in his neck. I knew there was something wrong down below. We both went to the GP and we were both told, oh, that's just this. Give it 6 months, we'll see how it goes. Him in his neck, 6 months later, the lump in his neck had grown. He ended up on radiotherapy and surgery. Mine was, I was told I had an infection. I had a epididymitis, and it'll be all right. Just get some antibiotics, it'll be okay. And then 3 months later, I was under the knife, having an orchidectomy. And I think the problem with it, if a bloke goes with something like that and gets an escape route, then yeah, all right, okay, I'll be all fine. I'll just have to keep taking the tablets and get on with it. If I can try compare and contrast it with other members of my family, unfortunately, we've had a lot of cancer around in our family, and the ladies in the family, when they know something's not wrong, be it thyroid, be it melanoma, whatever the situation is, they have persisted. In mine and my son's case, we were both lucky to see it through with the help of our families and partners. But yeah, was I looking for a way out when the doctor said, oh, it's just an infection? Yes, I was. And I was thinking, oh, that's a relief. I can forget about it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't an infection. And then 6 weeks later, when it still wasn't right, I knew it wasn't an infection. I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't keep persisting. I gave it a bit of time. Eventually, I went back, thankfully, and everything was okay. And that's another message as well. I think that people are too scared and worried about it.
Yeah.
I have an acquaintance of mine who's going through a very serious case of testicular cancer, and things aren't looking good. But I have to say for myself, there was pain, there was surgery, there was chemotherapy. Obviously, I was far more ill on the chemo than I ever was with the actual cancer itself as it went through. But it's this thing about persisting, knowing that there's something wrong, not being ashamed to talk about it. It's had no effect on all those parts of my life that men get worried about. Is it going to affect sexual performance? Is it going to affect relationships? Absolutely none whatsoever. In fact, I joke about things are a lot tidier now than they would be for a 55-year-old bloke normally. And I'm not embarrassed about saying these things, because you need to talk about things to get these things open, because all these things are going on in the back of men's minds that they don't want to talk about and they want to hide away. And it's, there have been some sort of soap opera storylines and things which try and talk about these things. But from my experience 5 years on, I don't really feel we've progressed. I don't really feel there's enough impetus, even though there's been campaigns by the likes of the Deadpool guy and things like that, and all the Checkham lads stuff and things. There's still not enough talk about it out there. There isn't, except very occasionally, a loose men on television or wherever. There just isn't enough conversation about these things, and we could probably improve men's health a lot more if there was a bit more conversation. And just get it, just more conversation about it, demystify it. It's not that scary. It's serious, but it can be dealt with, and that's the message we need to treat it like a broken leg or anything else.
Thank you, Neil. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Very, very helpful insight from your own personal experience. Paul, what's it like in the BAME community?
I suppose if I look at my own personal experience and then bring it back to the experience of young men I encounter these days, there isn't a great deal of difference. The reason why I say that is because I suppose as a young man, health was never on my radar in any way, shape or form. Health, it was something which was so far over there in terms of maybe older people. And when you're a teenager, early 20s, from my experience, it was all about, it was about having a good time. It was about self-image. It was about women. It was about making money. It was about all those kind of things. And I suppose the person who just spoke before, maybe there are particular messages that might be transmitted through various TV programs, but some of the young people who I speak to, they don't watch those types of programs. And so in terms of trying to take health messages to them when they're not really interested in health, mainstream has to do a very different job in terms of how do we engage with those sections of society who don't listen to particular radio stations, don't watch particular TV channels. How do we get those messages to them in a way that starts to engage them more so in starting to think about health from maybe a bit of an earlier age? Now, when I'm talking about health, I'm talking about mental health, I'm talking about sexual health. I mean, I'm working with a young man at the moment who's so entrenched in kind of like drug culture, and he's got money at his disposal. All he's bothered about is spending his money and having a good time. He's not particularly bothered about health, even though I recognize he's going through some mental health issues. But for him, it's nowhere near on his radar because he's just doing what he feels he wants to do. So part of the issue in some of this is how do we as a society, as mainstream organizations, how do we take these health messages to younger people so they start taking notice of them at an earlier age so that, you know, they start thinking about, about prostate cancer at some point of their life. So they start thinking about, you know, what kind of foods am I taking? What am I drinking? What's the effects of these recreational drugs that I'm taking? All those kind of things which lead on to quite a number of health issues for these young people. So that's kind of like my experience at the moment and my own experience when I was a younger person, which is still quite prevalent today.
So there are issues for younger people, there are issues for older men. I'm wondering, Jackie, what from a female perspective, what are some of the issues you've come across?
Well, I'm co-chairman of the Salford Healthy Communities. Hi, Kirit. And our experience is a lot of the men are embarrassed, and unless the wives talk about it or encourage them, it's, you know, they're hiding from it. You know, yeah. It's not happening to me. You know, there's a lot of, I think they're just denying that they're not well. And I think we're trying in the Salford community with the ultra-Orthodox through leaflets, through Zoom events, Kirit knows about, trying to encourage men and women to come forward and get screening, look after the health, early detection of cancer symptoms. And that's what we're working on. And we're slowly getting there. I mean, at the moment with COVID, we've not been able to have face-to-face meetings, but we're trying to do our best on Zoom. There's always something going on interesting, and we've had up to 100 people at one point talking about the COVID, COVID jabs, and people were coming on. So I thought that was very good. But I do think men are, slow to accept that they need some help. And Richard, I love your input. You're very honest. I admire what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. I just think it's always the women that are, right, do this, pushing the men to look after themselves. But we're trying. We publish a lot of stuff in the Jewish Advertiser to do with different health aspects, and it goes out to thousands and thousands of people's homes. So we're trying to make a difference. We know we're saving lives. We're not complacent. There's a lot more to be done.
I think the last thing that you said there, Jackie, is really quite significant. It's about saving lives.
Absolutely.
It's about avoiding premature death.
Absolutely.
That is often the case when men are in denial and don't get help. Steph, any thoughts from you? You need to unmute.
Sorry, so hi everyone, my name's Stephanie, I'm founder of the Butterfly Princess Send Initiative. You can find me on Facebook and on Instagram, and I'm a league anti-cancer champion. I do a lot of work with Kirit, and basically, coming from a woman's perspective, it's so much harder for men because us women, we can go meet up for coffee with our girlfriends or whatever, and and just talking openly, especially when it comes to like problems down below. But I suspect, coming from a disabled point of view, that there's a lot of, especially for men who have some point of disability, they may not be able to talk about cancer because they're not fully aware of how accessible treatments are for things. Like I watched a video launch for cervical cancer, which was done in partnership with Anti-Cancer and Girl Down Manchester the other week. And the video was good, it got really the message across, but it didn't really take into account how accessible it was going to be for people with disabilities. So I think when it comes to men's health, we need to be more open about it, but have a more open discussion about how accessible treatments are for male cancers for males with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's very, very helpful indeed. I mean, you notice thus far, we are not talking about the issues. We are talking about what is it that keeps us from owning up to the fact that we need help. We're afraid, we're shy, we're scared of the unknown. We feel embarrassed. All the kind of social things, if you like, that keep us away from getting help. So there's a fair amount of change of mindset kind of issues that we need to be tackling if we're going to be saving lives amongst men and women. Brian, any thoughts from you at this stage?
No, it's been really nice listening and really interesting to hear people's points of view. I think the thing is, it's about what's expected, I suppose. When we look at women's health, it's as if it's natural for a woman, and this could sound really awful, but it's natural for a woman to expect certain things. I remember as a kid, the whispered word, women's problems, as if it was quite natural because women expect certain things as they get older. And maybe men expect certain things as they get older. And one of the things we didn't expect was to actually get older. You know, that idea of saying, life starts and life usually finishes a very short time after retirement. We know now that's not the case. People are living a lot longer. The thing is, as we live longer, the risk of us and the risk of ill health is greater. The longer you live, the more opportunity ill health has got to get hold of you, not just cancer, but mental health. And with men, it is still, as opposed with all of society, you know, there are still those main taboos of cancer and mental ill health. They're whispered words. I personally think the time and the place to start is as early as possible. Yeah. That opportunity for me is in children, is in education, is in part of the curriculum. Not having people be afraid to mention that. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional. Not being able to sort of worry about mentioning that word, that it's not a whispered word anymore, it's reality. We you know, ill health is part of life. We're all got that chance of it. And we see adverts, 1 in 2 people will get cancer. Sorry, 2 in 2 people got it, me and my wife. What I think the thing is that we need to do is we need to make people aware that we can challenge cancer, we can cure cancer. We need to be telling people the success stories, not the negatives. And to me, saying 1 in 2 people will get cancer, to me, that's negative. What's positive is the number of people that survive cancers. Yeah. The number of people, yeah, absolutely. There's more chance now of surviving cancer than ever. It becomes, I had bowel cancer. It's like an operation to have your bowel or part of your bowel removed. It's an everyday thing, you know. Well, it's an everyday thing. It happens every day.
Cancer don't need to be terminal. And that's a very important point for us to understand.
Absolutely.
Treated, you know, early enough, the rate of survival is quite high.
Absolutely.
It's very important that we remind each other of that. I'm looking at Gordon. Gordon, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, just to introduce myself, I've got into the cancer business through Salford City Radio, where I'm studio manager and the presenter. Through that, I became a cancer awareness, champion. That's it. Yeah. My own experience is that I had a spat with breast cancer 15 years ago, and I've been clear for most of that time, for the best part of 15 years now. I've also had mental issues, and I still have mental issues as well. So I'm on 2 levels there. As far as the cancer is concerned, I do an awful lot of stuff connected with men's breast cancer because it's not much known about. And I was the typical idiot male with my breast cancer. What happened was I got all the obvious signs. My nipple inverted, then it started to crumble and break away, and I did nothing about it. It only got spotted when I had a severe attack of asthma and was rushed into hospital, and the doctor spotted it then, and that was it. And it was sorted out. So I'm very keen, particularly in the realms of breast cancer, to get men to be aware of it and to know that it's there and to look for it. And if you see it, do something about it. Don't be an idiot like me. Because if it were left to myself, I wouldn't have been dead.
Again, with a thing like breast cancer, the kind of notion is it only happens to women.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, they think I'm silly coming to them with this sort of issue, and I'm not going to talk about it. So you hide away and you end up sort of paying the price if you don't get help early enough.
And the way I see it, every man that men can get breast cancer, that's a chance of saving somebody's life. So I never shut up about it, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cedric, thoughts from you? You've been working with Jackie, you say?
Yeah, that's right. Jackie, well, through Kirit, I was invited to go into one of Jackie's sessions for Orthodox Jews and share my experience, which was with prostate cancer, which was diagnosed with back in 2005, had radiotherapy, and now, for the time being anyway, I'm clear. But what I was able to emphasise was the need for early action. So the way I got diagnosed was that I went to my GP for a regular checkup and happened to mention to him that my father at that time had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so he recommended strongly that I immediately have a PSA test. My GP recommended the PSA test had within a week or so. And then a few days after that, they got the results, which meant that I had to go for diagnosis. And I went for diagnosis again within a week or so, and then had another phone call from the hospital in Macclesfield, of being treated, and they recommended fairly strongly that I continue and have further tests to do with prostate cancer, which was subsequently diagnosed and treated. And I think what I was able to emphasise for Jackie's people was the need to act early. Once you're a certain age, you should have a PSA test if there's a history of cancer, prostate cancer within the male family, then have a PSA test. So that was my experience.
Thanks, Cedric. Can I just say, somebody like myself who runs a big organisation here with several congregations, I have people coming to the cathedral to worship, are members of my community. I very often see the side of people who perhaps have been diagnosed, but have not shared the information with leaders, for instance, and the behavior comes out really bad. And the impact when we don't share and we don't feel able to share, the impact we have on others is quite massive. So let me give you a very quick story. The person is now deceased. I had a member of my community here was really giving me personally a hard time. He would sort of make sort of was just very harsh towards me. He would pick issues with me for no good reason whatsoever. And I thought there was something not quite right with this individual, because he's saying things that are untrue, and he's behaving in a way that just does not make sense, because I was definitely not at fault. I was not doing what he was implying that I was doing or not doing. long story short, I invited myself to visit him posthumely. And he wrote me a letter resigning from a committee, and I said, would you like me to come and see you, have a chat about this? And he said, yes. I went along, saw him at home, and that's when he revealed to me that 18 months before, he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer. And when I looked back and I traced back sort of events and what have you, I realized that it was around about 18 months before that he started getting nasty and miserable and awful towards me. And in my case, in the religious community, somebody like me would be the kind of representative of God, if you like. And so he was clearly angry at God for cutting short his life. And he was a very lovely man, until he got nasty. And that's when I began to put it all in perspective and was far more empathetic and understanding. And long story short, again, I helped him through those following months and eventually buried him. I did his funeral service. And so I want to just give you a different perspective to the whole notion of, we as men tend to be afraid, shy, embarrassed, and all of that. When we don't disclose some of these very important things going on with our health, we do impact on others and the communities to which we belong in a serious way. Other people start to wonder what on earth is going on. Is there something wrong with me? But actually, generally, it's not something wrong with me, it's somebody else. The person concerned is struggling with something very obviously. And I can tell you many other scenarios like that. Over the last 5 years, I reckon I might have dealt with at least a dozen of those sorts of scenarios with people who belong to my community of faith. And I'm sure all of us, if you belong to a club or the school governors or whatever, you might pick up that kind of thing from colleagues. It might be that we ourselves are behaving like that because we don't know how to handle the fact and the diagnosis and the fact of our own mortality. If it was diagnosed as a terminal illness. So I just wanted to throw that different sort of angle out for us to think about as well. I'm looking at John. I know you're an anti-cancer champion, I think, John, Johnny Hurst. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Johnny. I'm the program manager for Answer Cancer. So I've worked for a few years now in the cancer arena. Very grateful for the fact that I haven't been directly affected in a big overbearing way myself so far in my own personal life. But certainly I've heard lots of stories, including some of the stories we've heard today about those whose lives have been touched by cancer. So thank you for those already that have shared their stories and the honesty involved there. Certainly I used to be one that would just ignore any health issues, and luckily it didn't lead to anything. I think the experiences I've had in a work capacity over the last few years has now changed my attitude on that. And I think if there were anything wrong, whether it was cancer symptoms or anything wrong with me now, I think I would make sure that I got myself to my GP and got checked out in a way that I wouldn't have done a few years ago. Maybe that's partly getting older, and I think you do become more aware of your health and the value of your health as you get older, but also seeing so many cases where when cancer was caught early, there was a good outcome, and when it wasn't, there perhaps wasn't so much. Bowel screening especially is a really key one that's already been touched upon, that when you look at bowel screening rates, you do see lower percentage rates of men coming forward for bowel screening compared to women. I think for a lot of the reasons that we've touched on here. So part of the work we're doing is doing quite a lot of different initiatives to try and engage with men to try and get that message across. And a key message again that was touched on by somebody else, it is still the case that people are still very much scared of a cancer diagnosis and see it as a death sentence. And so absolutely that positive message getting across to as many people that if it is caught early for bowel cancer, it's about it's more than 9 in 10. I think the latest stat is something like 97-98% if it's caught stage 1, if it's caught an early stage of bowel cancer, then you'll have a positive outcome. It can make such a massive difference So getting that message across of just how much of a difference it can make to catch cancer early, or anything else, you know, presenting early, you know, to your GP can make such a big difference. And I think for somebody who is fortunate enough so far not to have had any major kind of health things, I think it's, for me, it's about just not taking that for granted and being really appreciative of the health that I've got. I think it's easy when you're a bit younger, certainly my younger self, just kind of take it for granted. And I certainly hear a few people say that, you know, if they had their health, then they wouldn't, that's more than anything, the more value attached to their health than anything else they could think of. That, you know, other things could go wrong in their life and be hard to cope with, but the one thing more than anything else, you know, if I just had my health, I felt like, yeah, I could be okay.
More and more folk are using the term, my health is my wealth, isn't it? It's an absolute phrase.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I see Royale is on the call. Royale, are you with us? Royale?
Hi, Rogers. I'm here.
Any thoughts from you, Royale? You're a relatively young man.
Thank you, Rogers. You're always kind. No, it's lovely to hear the stories of everyone from different perspectives, from different angles, from different communities and faiths, etc. And I think for myself is, you know, people shared lots of personal stories as well. I think in some way, in some form, we do know someone loved, someone that we're dear to close, that we've lost someone. You know, I've had a family member who lost a child under the age of 3 due to cancer. And I had a very close friend of mine under the age of 40, I think he was around 35 at the time. So when it comes, obviously it deeply affects and shocks us. But at the same time, from myself, you know, in terms of personal opinion, from the South Asian community perspective, it's still a taboo subject, unfortunately. You know, until it hits you hard and you know someone close, that's when you pay attention. That's when you realize that there are services out there who can help the families to go through and those kind of things, really. Apart from that, we don't really pay too much attention from the community. And even from the faith perspective, you know, until it really hits, that we're not paying too much attention and not having a lot of knowledge about what to do and how to deal with those kind of things. So that's always an interesting one, you know, in terms of community and the cultural practices, that in some communities is still a very much a taboo subject. I think more work needs to be done to raise awareness. You know, someone shared about 1 in 2. I think you know, we hear the national media says 1 in 4 person has a cancer. But again, we don't really treat that as well. We just brush that off when we see those kind of adverts. So it's not something that, and given the circumstance that, you know, the global effect, the pandemic that we're all going through, and sometimes those kind of things, you know, they say that cancer, there's more people dying of cancer than probably coronavirus. But again, we're not giving enough heed to it. So that's really some of my perspective and my thoughts, really, Rogers, on that.
Thanks, Roel. Thank you very much. And of course, your point about cancer deaths, you know, many of those deaths can be avoided if they're early detected and treated, and men were encouraged to talk about it and go and find help through their GPs and so on. Meenakshi Desai, are you with us? Meenakshi, is there anything you'd like to share from your perspective on the whole issue of men's health and what men can do about dealing with some of those issues? You need to unmute, Ma. You need to unmute.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Right. Okay. So it was nice to hear from the previous speaker just now say about the taboo in some of the community, some BME communities, but majority of them, and especially when I have been doing a lot of work for the women cancer, for cervical cancer in my professional life. What even that taboo, when they can later come through the door saying that this is your appointment to go for screening, then it's as a family, men and women together. For a 25-year-old would say that, oh, no, you don't need to go for screening, you're too young or whatsoever it is. So that taboo is not just in the women, but all together as a family, men and women. And especially then when I do this work and when I ask more into it, even when then the men would say, oh yes, you go for breast screening, but for themselves, they are resisting to do any colon screening when this thing come through the door through this thing. So I entirely agree that men as a family man need to think about encouraging it, whether to go for vaccine or whatsoever. To the young boys and girls now for cervical cancer, both need to go for vaccine. And this big thing has come in Guardian recently published, and Ellen said that with this vaccine, or men and women, if they or the boys and girls take it, then 90% of this cancer is going to just eliminated, just like our smallpox days in my young life. But so it's a family responsibility for men as well as from themselves.
So more and more, the key really is for families, spouses, families, even with children. The key is really to be open to talking about these things. When you have breakfast together, or you're sitting watching television, you see something on the television that relates to health, to raise it, have a little conversation. How's it going? How are you feeling? If you detect something with your partner, you're looking a bit gray, maybe a bit blue, whatever, whatever color works for you. What's going on? Are you all right? Is there something that we need to go and check out? My good friend, Mr. Salam, is on the call. Amer, anything from you? Amer is a very young man. He's only 28. Share with us some of your thoughts.
Hello, Rogers.
Hello, lovely to have you.
Thank you, Rogers. I have a friend working in Manchester Royal Infirmary in the bowel cancer department, and if he wants to carry on with this program next time, I can invite him to come on.
Mm-hmm. That'll be very helpful. We'll take you up on that offer. I have a colleague, a close friend of mine, who does the colonoscopies. He does it at Liverpool Royal, and he does so many a day, and it's just routine. He tells me it's no big deal. They do so many. It's just very routine examinations these days, and it's not as awful as we might make it out to be. On that score, one of the questions that Kirit sort of put to me was, do men today have it easier or harder than their fathers or even their grandfathers? What are your thoughts? Easier or harder in terms of health issues?
I personally think it's easier, because it's not easy, but it's easier because there is far more conversation now than ever there was. I can name so many sports people who've had cancer. And how do I know that? Because they talk about it. And men's mental health now, it's almost become fashionable to talk about it, to say, I have mental health issues. And I think it's also easier because in my childhood, cancer was a death sentence, and it was a death sentence. I remember being at Manchester Children's Hospital in 2001, speaking to a consultant about a young child in my family. And he said when he started training, survival rate was 3%. He said when he finished training, it was just above 20. He said now it is 70. That left an awful lot, 30%, but it was a darn sight better than 2%. So I do think it has gone easier. I mean, the tragedy about that story is that consultant committed suicide 3 years afterwards. He'd seen an awful lot of tragedy in his life, but it is easier to talk now. But there are still massive, massive, massive gaps. There is still the hangover of the big boys don't cry. We've got to get out there and we've got to get people to talk, but it is easier than it was.
Do others of you sort of agree with Richard?
I'd like to
Anybody
make it from
disagree
2
with
points.
Richard?
Sorry.
Anybody disagree with Richard?
Well, I mean, I sort of agree, but I could make 2 points if people are interested. The first one is that I have an elderly father, 86. Fortunately, he's not been touched by cancer in his life. He's been relatively healthy all through his life, but he is embarrassed to go out because he has to use a stick to walk. And changing that whole attitude around. If I see an old gentleman, you know, walking with a stick to the bus, to the shops, I think good on him. You know, he's still out there, he's still doing things, he's not hiding away. And to promote that is one other thing. And then just from my own personal experience, again, to say that we have come on, but I'm sure we've still got a long way to go. If I go back to either end of my, let's put this reproductive life, shall I call it? When I had a vasectomy as a much younger man at the age of 31, and I had a slight problem with that, and I had to go for an ultrasound, I had to go to the maternity department in Worcester Hospital. Now, if you have testicular cancer issues, you need to go for an ultrasound. Thankfully now the ultrasound department is a separate thing to the maternity hospital in my local area. I hope to God there are no areas in the country where that's still the case, where a man has to go to the maternity department to get, you know, his testicles examined by ultrasound. Can you laugh about it
now, though, Neil? Can you laugh about it now?
Oh, I laughed about it then, because I had my young child with me and said, "Is that lady going to look at Daddy's willy?" You know, we laughed about it all the time, and all the women who just drunk 3 pints of water started laughing and all had to rush out the room and wait another half hour for their examination. So you know, you do laugh about it, but you know, those sort of systemic barriers which will stop men going need to be removed as well. I hope they have been.
So much of what we've been talking about kind of relates to the way we bring up children, the way we school our children, boys and girls, you know, the kind of big boys don't cry stuff and all of that. And I think what Richard said again, very instructive, the whole notion of, you know, we have it easier these days because people talk about it. You know, the big stars, you know, like the Archbishop of Canterbury talking about the depression he went through when he lost a child.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of thing, it pulls at the heartstrings, doesn't it? That even famous people like archbishops and bishops and so on have the struggle that others of us have. And the truth of the matter is that we're all human. And because we're all human, we will share commonalities in a variety of ways. Martin, anything you would like to say, Martin?
Just kind of coming back to your question just now about whether it's harder or easier. I suppose one thing which does make it possibly slightly easier is that there's so much more information out there now. I think before people would be relying on kind of, you know, whispers and things that people had like told them, which might not be, you know, Chinese whisper kind of things that won't necessarily be true. Nowadays, you know, you just go on the internet, you can Google things, you can find out proper sources of information from, you know, websites like the NHS and people like that. And there are kind of lots of charities obviously that work around different health issues like mental health. So there are lots of places you can get support, and that can be done anonymously as well. So if you've got something you don't want to necessarily talk to friends about, you can go and find some anonymous support online instead.
But also medical technology has improved dramatically. You know, when I was a school kid, I mean, I was in terror of getting a vaccination. You know, I've had 3 vaccinations now with the booster. I know you hardly feel the needle go in your arm, really, quite frankly, compared to when I was a kid. I mean, it was sore afterwards, you know, a few days later, but the actual kind of piercing of my arm with the needle wasn't as dreadful as it would have been much younger. I mean, keyhole surgery makes such a big difference. You know, you don't always have to be cut wide open if you had to undergo surgery. I mean, it makes a huge difference in the way we experience surgery these days. I'm looking at Kiran. Kiran, any thoughts from you, our chief organizer of this afternoon?
Well, thank you, Dean. That's very sweet of you. I think in terms of what we heard this afternoon, I think it's definitely a conversation about how men relate to other men, relate to the way that they were brought up, and then the relationship with their kind of networks, their friends and people they can go to. Who would they go to for help and support? And I think the anonymity that maybe social media offers, maybe a route for some, But I don't think that's the route from a lot of those men either, because all the factual information that you might get, or that might be more from trusted sources. So I think friends are a good place to start. So the other question I have really, which comes back to what Paul was saying, is that actually men relate to men in different ways, in different places. So, you know, a lot of the information that we're now offering to men doesn't quite get there for them. I think we have to create different ways and different approaches. I think it goes back to what Neil was saying earlier on about actually how do we get the information in a kind of sensitive way that are not going to stigmatize them as men? You know, what does it not being a man look like? Yeah, so I thought that helpful, Dean. I think in terms of how we can do better is not to start younger, but also start older. You know, there are different approaches I think we know we need to do more on. Yeah, I think I'll be quiet there, Dean, because, you know, I like to talk.
Thank you, Kieran. Paul, I mean, what advice would you give to all of us to promote men's health?
What advice would I give? I think it just touched on what Kieran said, really, in terms of men's health. Sometimes it can be seen like there's, well, it's not like there can be seen, there is a mainstream approach to disseminating health issues, but not all men use mainstream services. Not all men are tuned into the various channels that mainstream society will tap into, and so it's about looking at diverse ways of engaging different sections of society. That doesn't just mean the BME community. That means there's pockets of mainstream society that don't access these messages. Messages are not being filtered through to them. So it's about finding different ways of how to engage the various sections of society, regardless of colour, religion, etc., to promote men's health. And as we know, and as was said before, if people don't have information, then they are going to be prone and susceptible to ill health. It will affect them more so. So yeah, my advice is, how do we engage wider society in these public health messages?
Brilliant, thank you. And you said something as well about providing information. I mean, how are people going to know unless they read about it or hear about it? Information, communication the whole time is so very important. Never underestimate the power of a leaflet. You know, something lying down in a reception sort of desk or on, sent to somebody in the post can make a huge difference. I can tell you numerous stories of that. I remember when I was a parish priest in Didsbury many years ago, I used to visit an old couple who lived there for many years, and every time I went there, I noticed in the winter that their house was always very cold. And I made some inquiries. I said, do you have any central heating? And she said, no, we couldn't afford it. And believe it or not, Age Concern had put out a leaflet in my church about free central heating facilities for the aged. So I took the leaflet along and gave it to them. I gave it to her, and I said, please apply for this. Call them up and I tell them the story. Long story short, in 2 ticks, they got full central heating in a 3-story house. They would be much healthier for being warm in the winter. So don't underestimate the power of a leaflet. Brian, any advice for us? Men's health.
I was just thinking about some of the questions that was asked that I just like quickly to address, and that was about, is it tougher now or is it tougher for our dads? I couldn't even answer that question because my dad never talks about his health or men's health in general. The other thing is as well, and I said it before about, I see this like advertising on the telly that says 1 in 4 people get cancer. I see that very, very negative. Especially if you're the person that sat there thinking, oh, 1 in 4, I'm okay, I'll be one of the 3. The voice that doesn't get it. I think, to me, we have to get the message across in the ways that people have spoke about, and to say that every single human being on this planet is at risk of cancer. No ifs, no buts. That's an actual fact. And to me, that's the starting point. And then we sort of come at it from the other angle to say that, as you said before, that it's not all cancers are terminal. And as somebody said before about the child's chances with cancer have gone from 2% to 70%. Yeah, they're fantastic, absolutely fantastic figures. And the other thing what I would say with regard to any health, but specifically cancer, if in doubt, get it checked out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful advice. Richard, very quickly, a word of advice.
Just 3 phrases spring to mind. It's okay to not be okay. We've got to get that message through. The second one is, if in doubt, shout. Tell somebody, do something about it. And for me, probably the most important bit of advice is not knowing is actually worse than knowing. Even though you may get some bad news, at least knowing is better than not knowing. So if we can get those 3 messages to people, I think we'll go some way.
Those are terrific sound bites, Richard. Well done. That's really very helpful indeed. We're coming to the end of our time, folks. Could I just encourage you to connect with Kirit, with Answer Cancer, in terms of raising awareness? If you're not already a champion, speak to Kirit, become an Answer Cancer champion to promote the whole work of awareness raising, which is really what it's all about and what we're all about. And I'm so glad that you took the time this afternoon to be with us. Thank you, Kirit, and thank you, Martin, for helping us set all the technology up and connecting us all up. And we look forward to seeing you next time we have our Men's Hour. In the meanwhile, spread the message, get checked out, and stay healthy as best you can. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roger.
You too, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Bye now.